podcast started, I would start this review very differently. But now, because we are coming on 30 years from the era that this show, Green Legend, ran, was released, I think it is necessary to go into a couple of the sort of the details and the history and sort of where this OAV is coming from.
Right, and then I think that might explain why we've been requested to review it on a couple of occasions.
Yeah, so for the either younger listeners out there or maybe just people who are newer to the anime scene, let me take you to a time before time. The 90s. The 1990s. The anime scene was very different. It was somewhat recognizable, but there were a lot of companies dotting the landscape, some of which you may have heard of. There are companies like ADV Films, which technically still exists.
Yes, if you need your copy of Lady Death,
or Elfenlied for some reason. They technically still exist as a legal entity.
To hold on to that debt of whatever it was that they owed Dentsu, I guess.
But it's pretty much been dissolved. Basically, they've been taken over. Basically, they turned into Sentai Filmworks and Made in Japan.
Right, or Section 23 Films, because named after the section of the law code that permits them to,
in Texas,
to get away with that one.
CPM, which for some of our younger listeners, they probably have never heard of this company.
Yeah, Central Park Media.
Central Park Media, which is completely gone. And I wanted to actually, do a section or a segment at some point on, or just on Twitter, of just like all the stuff that they licensed that is just gone. Like has not been picked up by anyone else. They are just completely gone.
Yeah.
A lot of their stuff is just out in the winds.
Manga Video.
Manga Video, yes, which came over from England, the UK.
Right, and it's changed hands so many times as far as the ownership of like who owns Manga Video, but no matter who is the owner, Manga Video is never a company that gives a shit about
they're still around today. Their Twitter account is just like a weird meme account, and the last thing they released was a really bad release of Ghost in the Shell.
On Blu-ray. Do not buy the Manga Video Ghost in the Shell Blu-rays. Import the Korean Blu-rays if you can find them, because now they're really, tricky to get. But those ones have like, the English subtitles and the dual audio and, the dub and Japanese and English, that's like the good release basically. But
I always forget that they still exist.
Right, because they only have like Ghost in the Shell, Red Line, and Ghost in the Shell standalone complex.
Yeah.
And that's it. Also, Media Blasters, which started as primarily only releasing porn and then sort of branched out and it still goes through these like waves of thinking that they're out of business and then not.
What is like the full etymology of Media Blasters? Like first it was CPM and then Software Sculptors kind of emerged from CPM and then Software Sculptors sort of like because I know like Kitty Media was the porn label before Media Blasters.
Software Sculptors I think was like the outsourced part. Like Software Sculptures did some software, like some screensavers,
like the CD-ROM stuff that they would put out.
And then they also did, I believe that Utena was released under Software Sculptures.
Slayers was sort of like the first one I can think of that like had Software Sculptors on all over it. Maybe Here is Greenwood. I think that might have been theirs also, because at the time it said like not mainstream, like even for anime nerds, like no one could possibly get this Here is Greenwood. But nowadays, a million things like Here is Greenwood.
Right, and then they. I split off into Media Blasters, and then Media Blasters has all of their labels, like you mentioned, Kitty Media. Then Anime Works was their normal anime line, and then they had like I forgot what their live action line was.
Tokyo Shock was their live action line,
which did very well for them. That was probably the thing that did the best for them. That was
I think they still do a lot of live action. Movies.
They still have the rights to some of those old things, and it's unfortunate that. At some point Japan was like, oh, we don't need these guys to do these things. We'll make our own label and Sushi Typhoon or whatever. And then now you get almost nothing. Like Welgo USA will occasionally release something lurid, but mostly they're releasing respectable things onto Netflix.
Yeah. And then, of course, Animego, which was around then and is still around now and is just about to release Megazone 2.3 and is about to put together a Kickstarter for Mataso.
My Megazone 2.3 has shipped. or at least the shipping label was printed out because, Robert Woodhead has to like do this stuff more or less by himself with his wife.
Yeah, it's like him and his family are doing this. And so
to get these things to the post office and pack them and what have you.
Another company that existed then was also a company called Streamline, which dissolved in about 2002 or 3, but
effectively didn't exist. They were dormant for many years.
Yeah, I believe their last release was a movie called Crimson Wolf, which I have on DVD, which is a weird one. But yeah, they were the biggest and then dissolved completely.
Yeah, on the subject of Streamline Pictures, there's this huge write-up over on Cartoon Research from their first employee, who was also, I think, their last employee, the late, dearly departed Fred Patton, who it turns out a lot of people have never heard of.
Right. The literal founder of anime fandom. Literal, like patient zero of anime fandom. And then there was another company which is important, and this company was known as Pioneer, or Pioneer LDC.
And what does LDC stand for?
LDC stands for Laser Disc Corporation.
Right, and because that was their specialty.
Yes. Well, Pioneer has been a company since the 1930s, and Pioneer LDC has existed since 1981.
I remember I always wanted their Laserdisc releases, but I didn't have like a Laserdisc player.
Well, yeah.
And at the time, like I didn't really have money
expensive.
to like buy it. Yeah.
The Laserdiscs
was the format that
awesome.
Pioneer invented. Pioneer LDC created the Laserdisc format.
Yeah.
They specialized in releasing things on Laserdisc. And so when it came to Japanese animation, they, in Japan, were producing anime, and so they would release things on Laserdisc. And Laserdisc was the top, highest quality format.
It's like a DVD, but like the size of a vinyl
record.
And this was back before, like, this was the only way you could get multiple tracks of audio into like one video.
A VHS
signal.
tape,
And
you'd have to pick either you wanted the dub or the sub. You'd have to pick which one you were buying up front. A Laserdisc had both.
And I remember people used to also like everybody wanted to import a lot of the Laserdisc releases because of the size of the packaging, like they'd have these really elaborate, like really beautiful covers.
Right. They'd create unique artwork for the Laserdisc such that these things are still sought after by collectors.
Yeah, like those limited
I have
LD covers.
A lot of the Pioneer Laserdiscs, because all of the art was originally made for Laserdisc, and there were two formats of Laserdisc. There were CLV and CAV. Yeah. And this was the problem with Laserdisc, was that CLV could fit an hour per side, but you couldn't get a good still frame. CAV could fit 30 minutes aside, but you got perfect still frames.
And you were able to pause and get like a pristine screenshot, like
but
still
remember,
image.
If you're watching a 2-hour movie,
right, you have to now flip
CAV.
Over your Laserdisc.
Yes, constantly.
Like I remember, like even in the 90s when they were still releasing like other things on Laserdisc, like Martian Successor Nadesco, they would have as extras on each of the Laserdiscs live action shots, little bits of the voice actors. And so at the end of each of the 2 episodes, there would be a little cut, and one of the VAs would say, "Flip the Laserdisc over," or something like that.
Yes, yeah, very cute. And Laserdiscs were the best format for anime
until
to DVD.
DVD came out in the late 90s.
Prior to DVD, this was the best possible way.
I feel like they had a kind of short shelf life, because I guess DVDs came out and also, not that long after.
Well, Laserdiscs were early 80s up until about late 90s.
Right.
And that's only about 20 years.
But
DVDs,
say only about 20
know,
years. That's a quick thing to say, but to live that's like my entire like formative youth was this scrambling of people to pool together money to buy that Laserdisc and then maybe subtitle it.
Yes.
And then if you had like the means to capture the footage from the Laserdisc to, sync up with your Genlock or your Amiga or your, subtitling thing, then you could have, SVHS masters of a fan sub, and then you'd be in business, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Even in fact, just a couple of episodes ago, we reviewed a show that the subtitles, the fan subs we watched were from Laserdisc rips, because there's still a lot of anime that has not been released on any other
Kyomu Senshi
format.
Miroku was done in that way.
It also may just be like I may always forget like how long they were actually out, just because a lot of people like didn't have them, and so like I always think of like VHS as being like the really long standing like format.
Laserdisc was like the enthusiast format, and this was back before like a lot of the concept of like the home video enthusiast even existed.
How much
really.
did Laserdiscs cost?
They were about $30 to $40 a disc, and so they were not cheap, and this is 1990s money.
Yeah.
And so this is, you know, it was funny because you could go into, back when these type of stores existed, you could go into, you know, stores that sold media, like CDs, cassette tapes, and there would be like a section that looked like they sold records, but there would be a section there for Laserdiscs.
Although to be fair, VHSs weren't that much cheaper if you were buying the subtitled.
No, they weren't. They really weren't. That's why.
But the VCRs were cheaper.
Yeah,
than the
player
Laserdisc
was
players.
expensive for a Laserdisc player.
My Laserdisc player broke down every 30 minutes. Like I sent it to Puerto Rico. Must have been 3 or 4 times to get it repaired. It was so like the Laserdisc players broke down.
That's
so
rough. You having
much.
to mail it to Puerto Rico
Because again,
every
you live in
time.
Virgin Islands, and so it's not like you can take it to a repair store that's local.
It was hilarious too, because the address in Puerto Rico, it wasn't an address, it was literal directions. Like it was clearly this place that was just like in the countryside and like a shack. And so it wasn't even like, there weren't numbers on the road, it was like third on the right.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, that is Laserdiscs. And so
Pioneer,
Daryl mentioned this,
like we said, they'd
Daryl
invented the format.
They invented the format, and then Pioneer LDC as kind of a way to sort of promote Laserdisc as well. They dipped their toe into anime production. I believe the first thing that they worked on was a very forgettable show called Spirit Warrior that we got over here. CPM released that show. Just a very like...
That's an insane cartoon, though. Peacock King.
Oh, yes.
That is a cartoon made by
I always
Mad
remember
Men.
the trailers for that on like the other anime videos. Like that was always like one of the big trailers they'd hype up.
Yeah, it's one where you can get some good scenes out of it, but the whole thing is
the manga is still being scanlated because there's 17 volumes of that bad boy.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
But yeah, no, that's...
It's one where maybe I need to go back and revisit it to see
There's
if,
a lot of... That's like a Young Jump seinen 80s thing that's just is like going all out. But yeah, I think... obviously, Rintaro directed the OAV, and as we were talking about things that are lost, it's everything from Rintaro is perpetually, permanently lost, like to the world.
I feel like that all of that stuff, like, and some of those are the worst movies ever made.
Well, we can never decide which
they
ones
all
are.
look beautiful.
They all look incredible, and I want to own all of them, even if half of them are terrible.
Yes.
Like, there's sure a hell of a lot of problems with the X movie, but it looks good.
Yeah, I want to see that on 4K Blu-ray. So.
Yes.
But as it went on, Pioneer LDC was the first Japanese company that recognized that there was a market for their product to the point that they actually started up an American division and started releasing their own anime in English. And, shockingly, they did a good job of it.
Now, actually, before you get into it, I'm thinking in my head, it's like, wait a second, if Rintaro did Peacock King, how could it be with Pioneer? Wasn't he a Madhouse guy? And it turns out there are 2 Peacock King OAVs, and the first one that you said was the one Pioneer did, and that's by your boy Katsuhiro Akiyama, and Ichiro Itano, my boy, for the second episode, and written by Sho Aikawa on both of them. So, you got that Angel Cop pedigree for that
now
original
I need to watch
OAV.
this and make sure I'm watching thinking the right thing.
And then
yes.
Rintaro, the Madhouse one, was afterwards. That was in the mid-90s.
Okay. But yeah, so basically now Pioneer LDC started releasing their own anime, and some people may recognize this company because they turned into a company named Ganion. And so they went out of business in 2009. But yeah, that Ganion used to be Pioneer.
Right.
Now, as
Pioneer
far as I can tell,
used to make not just Laserdisc players. They were primarily known as like a hardware manufacturer to me at the time because they made VCRs and CD-ROM drives and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, they mostly make like audio stuff now. They're still around, Pioneer, as a hardware company. If you go to their website, like if you're into like car audio, you probably know Pioneer.
Yeah.
And Pioneer LDC doesn't exist anymore. I believe they were dissolved into Universal NBC Japan. So I know I'm going kind of far out of the way here, but this is like ancient history now, and this is kind of relevant to what I'm talking about.
Yeah. They had a lot of like really big titles though. I feel like
Yes.
all of those like AIC pictures.
Yeah, especially in the
Titles
90s,
were-
like they were the king. Like Tenchi Muyo, they built an empire
Yeah.
off of
Let
that.
me get to that stuff. I want to talk about that because this is important, like the way that they released things. And the first thing that they did, like that they released, was this very, very high budget, highfalutin OAV that no one watched, called Dog Warriors: The Hakkenden. And if you
Yeah.
watch this,
Great first
they animated
episode. Phenomenal
they animated
first
the
episode.
shit out of it.
And then it was not good for like the
Yeah.
remaining 12 episodes.
And it took like 12 years or something to come out. It was like a hugely long project.
I think that's been animated multiple times.
Yeah, the Hakkenden, actually, they
Yeah.
just released another like Hakkenden like recently.
Yeah.
Like this is an old novel. So the Hakkenden is not a Pioneer thing, it's just a Japanese novel. But of course, what sent them into the stratosphere, as we all know, was Tenchi Muyo. And Tenchi Muyo was one of the most popular anime in the 90s, which
Oh my God.
inexplicably is going today. Episodes, as we record, came out like, what, a month ago?
Right.
Like
it's just
they're
it's-
still
nobody cares about Tenchi Muyo because of, again, the churn rate of anime fans. Like, you know, those people who are maniacs over Tenchi back in the day, you know, they had their patience tested even, you know, throughout the 90s.
They
and then,
they managed to really harness that concentrated waifu power.
well, I think it's
Yeah.
sort of like the progenitor for what we think of as like the real like modern harem anime template was the Tenchi Muyo kind of stuff. Like to me, I
Tenchi
pin it
Muyo
on
was
Kimagure
huge.
Orange Road as like the real thing, and then you know you sort of like twist that plus Amurase Yatsura and you get the Tenchi Muyo one, which everyone has
Yes.
copied since.
Which is very funny because the people that worked on Tenchi Muyo, there was an interview with them and they said, you know, where did they start with this? And they said, yeah, we were working on Gal Force. And then I guess they were like, how about Gal Force, but if there's one guy? And I don't know. But
Well, again, that's another one where there's three creators and one guy was into this aspect of it and one guy was into whatever.
Yes.
And the one guy who ended up being left to like, you know, have stewardship of the whole thing. Like this was his thing that he wanted to focus on in Tenchi Muyo. And that's what
Yes.
you got today.
And yeah. However, in between Tenchi Muyo coming out and just blowing away everything, there was this short series that came out just before Tenchi Muyo, like literally like a month or two before it. And that's the 3-episode, sort of a weird little passion project by director Satoshi Saga and writer Yu Yamamoto, Green Legend Ran. A work that, while getting released like all over, like this was kind of all over the place. It was running on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah, I think that's where I saw it. I watched it on Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah, it's
I always
mostly
knew
forgotten.
people who had like the laser discs, and then like even though I saw it on the Sci-Fi Channel, like when we were like get the recommendations from people to say like, hey, please review this, like my initial response is I actually don't remember anything about this, and so you know, but you're right, it's mostly forgotten.
Mostly forgotten. So, is that for the better? Well, let's get into this.
Yeah, it was interesting going back and watching it because I realized I was like, you know, I definitely recall watching this, but I have no actual clear memory
Of any of the
show
characters
itself.
or any of like the events that transpired in it or what it's really
Right.
about.
I guess I was different because I'm different in that I never saw it on Sci-Fi Channel. Until you guys mentioned it, I didn't know it ran on the Sci-Fi Channel. Sitting right next to me right now is how I watched it. I have this, I should take pictures of this because this thing is probably rare as shit. It is the size of a Laserdisc box, and it is the VHS box of Green Legend Ran, and it is gorgeous. This huge thing, I'll never get rid of it.
Right.
Oh
And
man, those deluxe like huge VHS packages are amazing.
Right.
it comes with the shirt, which is unworn, this beautiful like art book, and all 3 video cassettes and like postcards and everything, and it's gorgeous.
If the shirt
And-
won't fit you, you should just like wear it and be like stretched out, like, you know, like the big, like, you know, turbo nerd with a
I think that this was made for 90s anime nerds, so I think it was
like
like
5XL.
triple-
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'll take pictures of it And hopefully these are, we remember and put them on the blog because it is a beautiful release. So, back to Green Legend Ran. And this takes place in a future where aliens known as the Roto have landed on Earth and effectively destroyed the environment, turning the surface of the Earth into a dry, barren desert.
Yeah.
Right.
Now,
it's very like, Space Battleship Yamato, Fist of the North Star, like, apocalypse, like, the oceans have dried, etc.
Right.
Kind of scenario.
But, I guess the difference is that those took place within the lifetimes of the characters in the show. This is hundreds of years later. Hundreds of years have passed, and humans have effectively been relegated to just slums. And the most precious resource in the world...
It's not quite clear how they have survived, honestly.
Right, because if the water is gone, then it's like, what are you
There's
eating?
no plants.
What are you,
Yeah.
let's not, dwell too much on it.
But this show is all about just like, don't think about the details.
Because the second you do, it's like, hey, wait a second, this is bullshit.
The most precious resource is water, and everyone is ruled over by the Roto themselves. And then there is a group of humans have kind of sided with the Roto called the Rotoists. They're like kind of a religious cult that sort of worships these people. Mm-hmm. And so we get our main character, who is shockingly called Ran, of the titular Green Legend Ran. And he is, I think, hot-headed would be a pretty apt description, precocious.
Yeah, I mean, he's your sort of like straightforward, like passionate idiot.
Yeah, shonen
character.
style. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very straightforward. And, lives his life kind of on the edges, stealing water, making a living kind of however he can. And basically he's sort of on the lookout for this Roto soldier with this scar across his chest, who, as best as he can remember, killed his mother in a firefight when he was much younger.
And his mother does, in fact, have dead anime mom hair. I had to pause it and do a Google image search for what dead anime mom hair looked like.
Yes.
And then I was like,
she's got the ponytail. It's just, it wasn't over her shoulder.
Yeah. Well, it's the ponytail. It was tied like at the bottom. So maybe it's like a precursor to the full on dead anime mom hair. But she's still a dead anime mom. I love that you can actually
just Google dead anime mom hair and like get the appropriate result.
So all mothers out there, Google this and make sure you never have this hair.
Right.
So it's dangerous. So it is during this time that Ran runs into this girl named Iba, a girl she is part of this militant rebel faction known as the Hazard.
Like the Dukes of Hazzard. That's like literally the two Z's, exactly how they spell it in the subtitles.
Yes. And Ran is quite taken with Iba, or Ida, with her, and joins up as kind of an unofficial member in the hopes of sort of finding this man with the scar. And of course, this becomes a much bigger story involving the Roto and them attempting to sort of restore this planet to the green that it was many generations ago. Mm-hmm. So it is worth noting that Green Legend Ran sets up a really, really big story that it tries to tell in 3 45-minute episodes.
Yeah.
I think the last episode is maybe about 10 minutes longer.
A couple of minutes longer, yeah.
Yeah. And so, to its credit, this would be a challenge in like a 2.5 hour long movie, the story that it's trying to tell.
Right. Like when I saw the trailer for this, because the trailer was something you'd see, kind of often. And then years later, I saw the Japanese trailer. I was like, this is like a thing that's like Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. That was like the thing I was thinking was like the most similar to. Like I wasn't aware like too much of some of the other stuff that they were trying to go for. Like, I saw Nadia later, but like at the time I was like, oh, this is like Nausicaa sort of story. And Nausicaa also was this, after this like ecological apocalypse, and there's a war going on between these factions, and there's some sort of like odd creatures and what have you. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is like that. And that movie was about 2 hours long.
Right. And you can see that where it's coming from, because this came out in about 1992. Let me get my days.
And
Let me get
in the
my
early
days.
90s,
1992.
Save the Rainforest was all about like, all these sort of cartoons were about that. And it turned out that we did not, in fact, save the rainforests at all.
No,
so
didn't do anything.
nothing
It's, in
was
fact,
done
worse than it
whatsoever.
Nothing. Well, the problem was, of course, is that all that bullshit was directed at you need to save the rainforest.
How am I supposed
you
to do it? Well,
individual.
I'm just going to go to the
Right.
Brazilian government and tell them to stop cutting that shit down for farmland.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
well, that was like the plastic companies started
Yes.
those TV ads.
It's like you
Where it's like,
must
you
the one
need
with
to
the crying
recycle.
Indian
You need
about
to
of
do
your
this.
six pack, and it's like, how
Yeah,
about
it's
you
all your fault
stop
for littering.
manufacturing plastic?
yeah.
Like how about you guys actually like take care of your shit that you make?
But yeah, it was
So,
like this
yeah.
long recurring theme throughout the 80s and 90s of like stories with like this very environmental theme
Captain
because
Planet.
yeah, and a lot of
Fern
times
Gully.
the
Fern Gully,
message
yeah.
of all these things was the responsibility of doing this is on you, the end consumer, or you, the average person. You said Captain Planet. It's like, what's Captain Planet's catchphrase is the power is yours. That's what Captain Planet
Yeah.
would say.
Yes.
Well, the power is not mine, Captain Planet. The power is Duke Nukem is dumping toxic waste into the river from his factory that does nothing but produce toxic waste to dump into a river, which at the time
Yeah.
I thought was cartoonish, and now it's actually just real.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so before we get into some of the really thorny details of Green Legend Ran, I want to actually start on a positive note because it's probably going to go downhill after that. And so I want to talk about a couple of good things about the show, even if it's hard to think of them. So
It looks good.
I think the designs are pretty god tier. Like, when we were looking through like those supplemental extras
Yeah.
on the Laserdisc of like all these concept sketches and the background environments and things like that, I was like, wow, this is actually very, very like well thought out.
Ira's hair is fucking weird and always slightly bothers me, but yeah.
I think the show does a fantastic job of conveying this world to you with just showing you the world. Like there's
Yes.
no like there's, for example,
There's no-
like
as
if you
you
go
know,
walking out
there's no
if you
water.
go walking out into the desert, for example, you have to wear like a desert like suit. And they don't explain this. It's just assumed like this is what you wear in the desert. And if you have to go into the deep sand, you have to wear like a much larger suit. And all of the stuff is thought out really, really well, I think. A huge like attention to detail in that part of it, I should
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, kind of like this sort of proto light novel approach where it's like there's a lot of focus on a world building exercise, but they don't, unlike the modern light novel adaptation, they don't like throw this at you through dialogue exposition.
No,
They it's just there and you observe it.
You observe it, right. And I love that about the work. Also, there's some points in this where the animation is just stellar, like drop-dead gorgeous animation sometimes. It's not a consistent work, but
Yeah, like
there's a lot of
we
like,
noticed in the credits,
Yeah.
like they would outsource like certain cuts to other studios or places, and so one of the in-between animation people was Gynax and some guy named Yo-Yo Shinari,
Right.
who nowadays is like over at Trigger doing Little Witch Academia and stuff like that. Really top tier work. And so again, it's quote in between animation. It's not called key animation. The people who credited for that are different, but there's a whole lot of like moments on this that would make like some pretty impressive cuts for your Sakuga blog
Right.
or what have you.
And also, one of the things that stood out to me the most, and maybe it didn't stand out to anyone else, but that was the soundtrack. And the soundtrack for this, and I wanted to talk about this a little bit, there was a musician who worked on this called Yoshishiro Yoshikawa. And he's done very, very little anime work. He mostly does like theater and stage work. He's done about maybe a dozen anime franchises. Although some of the things that he's done you might remember the music from it. Like he did the music for Dominion Tank Police, and he did the music for Iria, the animation.
Oh, yeah.
And both of those are killer soundtracks.
Right. Of course,
Yeah.
you have to clarify because a lot of people, if they saw Dominion Tank Police, they may have seen the English dub of it, which
Yeah, he didn't do
replaced
that
all of the
English
music,
opening.
like 100%. And then similarly, like because this is a Pioneer production and it was like Pioneer, because they had this money from all this like other endeavors, Pioneer would also do music and soundtracks and stuff like that in addition to
Yes.
anime production. They would put their acts and stuff into these anime things. They also said, well, for English dubs, you need to re-render the song in English. And so they would produce an English version of
Yeah.
the songs that Pioneer would do. other people, they said, well, that's the way you do it at the prestige level. We have to show that we're on the level, and they started doing that too. It turns out nobody actually wanted this, but the point I'm getting at is they would release soundtrack CDs in the United States.
What helped them with that was it helped them get on television.
Right.
And
because people don't want to hear a Japanese song in 90s US television or, even 2000s.
And like I've got the CD, they started marketing the stuff as Panime, Pioneer Anime, and they released like a CD with all of the music. In fact, maybe I'll use like part of that track in here. But like the track for Green Legend Ran was called Tears and Rain, which is a gorgeous piece of music. Like the theme plays, it's basically like Aiba's or Ira's theme throughout. And that was Yoshikawa. He's still around today. He has not worked on anime since 2014. But pretty much any time he does, it's really, really, really good work. Unfortunately, Green Legend Ran also has some problems as a show. And so I'll start out with the most obvious problem, to me at least. And that is
Ran.
The problem of Ran in Green Legend Ran.
Existing, yeah. So why is this show called Green Legend Ran? It would suggest that you've got this kid who gets embroiled in this conflict and then does stuff that becomes this legend.
Mostly things happen to him. I would most compare him to the character Parn from Record of the Lotus War in that they're very similar in that the Parn that you see at the very first scene of the Record of the Lotus War is exactly the same in the very last scene.
I would argue that the Parn that we see in that first episode is way cooler than we saw at any other point in Record of the Lotus War. But yes,
I would say chronologically.
Right, yeah.
I was trying to think of a good comparison. It's like, maybe a little bit like Kurt Russell in Big Trouble in Little China. Everyone else is actually
doing the work.
Ones doing
he just happens
heavy
to
lifting.
exist. Like I likened it to Kaneda and Akira, but in Akira, like, yes, he has a whole lot of plot armor and is present as a bunch of shit goes down. But even Kaneda does something to advance things or move things forward. Ron is just present. He's just a hanger on. He doesn't really do anything. And in fact, he's actually continually actively detrimental to everything that needs to happen.
People are always trying to stop him from doing stuff because everything he wants to do is really fucking stupid.
And will get him killed. And he does it anyway, and a lot of people get endangered or in horrible trouble because of him. And he also is got that very much...
And he never at any point learns any lesson from this.
No lesson learned, no character growth. And so there's this interview with the director on the Laserdisc. He's like, the most important thing is I want you to see the character growth of Ron's, maturation over the series. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, Satoshi Saga?
All of us were like, what growth?
It's like no wonder you're the screenwriter of Demon Beast Invasion, because it's like, what is this? Like, you're talking about. Ron was a piece of shit in the beginning, and in the end, it's like, he's got two quests that you talked about. The first, Gerald, that you mentioned is, I gotta find this man with the scar on his chest who killed my mom. That's his driving thing.
And the other one is, I gotta save the mysterious girl with the silver hair.
The girl with the silver hair. And in both cases, they give him the same Kyomu Senshi Miroku, Kung Pao, enter the fist. I urge you to reconsider. Okay. And then he drops it.
Yes, pretty much there, and there was another side thing that he's sort of trying to find his dad. It's not a major plot point, but that's also there, and that might be the biggest problem with the show. Like during the show, he runs into some water traders,
and these are all the best characters in the show who this whole thing should have been about.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, arguably, that is most shonen shows. Is the best characters are the side characters. The main character is usually the worst character. Like Naruto is the worst character in Naruto. There is some growth to the Naruto at some point, but this is it's rough because like he runs into these like water traders, and these water traders are great. Like I wish that the whole show were about them.
And yeah, all like these super famous Japanese seiyuu are all like the cast of these people, and they're not really introduced until like the second episode, and they're all still kind of, you know, second fiddle because, you know, they're just sort of there to get Ron from point A to point B. But really, when you reveal their backstories to these people, they're like, oh, these people are actually a million times more important than what this idiot's up to.
And Ron, like, these people are saints because Ron, like, from the moment they meet, like, almost gets them killed virtually every time that they're together. And
it's like, hey, Ron, watch your footing there. Don't kick over that, you know, fuel tank or that air tank. It's like, I don't need to listen to you. I'm leaving. He slips and falls, and there's a tremendous explosion, and nobody particularly is that
don't
mad.
run out into that hallway where people are shooting, like, visibly, like, bullets are flying down.
You don't tell me what to do. You guys are slowing me down.
Yeah, and so it's you know, they're saints for tolerating his you know, his bullshit. And so that is probably the single biggest problem of it. The other problem, as we talked about, is that the story is so ambitious that it's trying to tell. Like, this is something that, you know, you would have trouble telling the story in like a 26 episode
Exactly. It
series.
feels like the pacing of it is the first two episodes would be like the first two episodes of a 13 or 26 episode show, and then the third episode is we have to tell the remainder of the story in the span of like this 50 minutes or whatever. And
it's like this slow buildup, and then like all of this stuff crammed into this very short conclusion.
Right. And it is hugely ambitious, which, you know, I do give them credit for.
Sure.
That they're trying to tell this story. And also it's like very unclear, and these are some minor spoiler, I guess these aren't kind of minor,
yeah,
but these are some spoilers, but I want to bring these up
but
as well.
I have to mention it, yeah.
I have to mention this.
The just
like
inconsistency and like, so like wait, what happened?
One of the things they talk about is like trying to restore like the green to the world. And apparently the green can be restored to the world through the machines that the Roto have brought to Earth. But the Roto work, like the way they work is hydraulic despotism, like, which is a real thing. Hydraulic despotism is control people through their water.
Right. That was like, you know,
like Fury Road.
Yeah, Fury Road, you know, Quantum of Solace, etc., you know.
And real countries that exist in this world are doing this.
Yes.
And
Nestle Corporation.
Why would you have the tools to restore this landscape back to green and therefore completely undo all of your control? Like, I don't understand that.
Right, like, remember the opening scene of this was the aliens showed up and bombed the planet Earth and destroyed everything. And therefore, they come and they settle the Earth and colonize it. It's like, okay, makes sense when Gamulus does it because they're like, we need to terraform the Earth's atmosphere to live there.
In the year 2199, planet Earth was facing extinction. In the mid-21st century, the mysterious planet Gamelon, a planet outside our solar system, declared war on all of Earth. These evil marauders of space, known for their ruthless warfare throughout the galaxies, began to bombard Earth with their deadly planet bombs. The surface of the Earth became unlivable. People could only survive by moving to underground cities far below the Earth's surface.
But these idiots apparently blew up the Earth, and then their like quest is to restore the Earth. It's like, well, how about you not drop fucking bombs?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Is like, it, you know, I'm all for like unreliable narrators, but it more feels like they just like couldn't figure out like who was supposed to be the bad guy or like what, because it's like there's a whole part at the end where it's like they like supposedly like humans are to blame for like destroying the Earth, which I mean,
I'm pretty sure the bombs you guys dropped were more of a factor in this particular fantasy setting.
Yeah, and maybe that's self-serving or like trying to pass the blame, but it just feels inconsistent. Like, you guys were the ones that like actually destroyed everything.
And they're the only people that could restore the world on that scale were the same people who destroyed it. And somehow they have the tools to do this, which makes no sense why they would.
Right. And then then it becomes like, kind of a Zabungle situation. Because I know you said it reminds you of, those other heroes. But like as we were watching it, the hero I was reminded by Ron most of was Jiron Amos from Zabungle. Yeah. Because Jiron is a fucking sociopath, melonhead psycho who is like, time to target the civilian sections of the domes, guys. Well, now in this one, it's like, what? They want to restore the green to the earth. We got to put a stop to this right now. So that's kind of their quest. Yeah. It's like they're going to bring back trees and water? Absolutely not.
Well, I mean, I understand because there was something about how the way that they were going to do it was also going to involve killing all of the people.
That's revealed later that it's like, okay, it's a Ra's al Ghul kind of plot where it's like, all right, we will restore the earth by destroying humanity in a very JRPG style of sense. They didn't know that at the time.
Right.
No.
Yeah, the motivations and everything are very unclear and like it doesn't quite line up and like, and some of that may be unreliable narrators, but it just comes across as inconsistent.
So I have a theory for that. And my theory is the business model, at least from the outside, as I view it, the business model of how Pioneer LDC worked. And it seemed like, and there are several examples for this. Tenchi Muyo was kind of the outlier because Tenchi Muyo was so like insanely successful. And even Tenchi Muyo kind of had this model, which was, and Battle Athletes did this, and El Hazard did this, was let's release a relatively short direct-to-video series and sort of test the market for this thing and see if people are interested in this thing.
And if they are,
then we will do a TV series after the fact. They did that with El Hazard. Like Battle Athletes, we got the Battle Athletes. And someone is probably going to say, like, well, that doesn't really work with Battle Athletes. And they're kind of right because the first episode of the TV series showed up like at the very end of like the OAV series, but it's a similar ideas of are people interested in this idea? And
although you would think they wouldn't want to conclude the entire story.
Yeah, it seems like the whole thing is resolved by the end of this third episode.
Well, they did that with Battle Athletes, and then in the TV series, they resolved it. They introduced new villains and resolved it in a completely different way.
That's true.
And so they can do that. And so I think what we're looking at here is half of this business model. Let's release these three sort of relatively low cost compared to doing an entire TV series, episodes of this, and test the market. Clearly, people just weren't interested. And so it never went beyond this. There was no manga, I don't believe. There was nothing else except...
Yeah, I think this was just an original production.
This was just an original production. And so I think if we had gotten that TV series, maybe it could have been pretty good. It could have been painfully awful if they realized that Ran was just going to be the same Ran we saw on this show, like through 26 episodes. But it might have also offered, more depth to like the side characters, which could have been great. It could have fleshed out this world, which there was definitely a lot of story to tell and a lot more fleshing out to be done. But of course, that never happened.
Right, like because again, like the personal driving goal of Ron, to track down this guy, they reveal who he is, and it's like, okay, well, that's an interesting twist in like the development, but then it like casts some ambiguity as to like, who's the true bad guy, and okay, I can go for that. That's cool, but then like. The way they resolve that is to not resolve it, and they basically take it away from you. It's like, okay, he tracks down the guy that he's like spent his whole life tracking down so he can kill him, and then
it's like, well, no time for this now. Got to do something else.
And then a person who says, hey, don't do that, and he doesn't really give him the suitable explanation. Like, yes, we the viewers know, okay, this person has this relationship to Ron, and it's like, okay, but that was never actually told to Ron. So,
Right.
Well, there's actually a really I like the scene in this where it seems like Ron was figuring this out, and Ron just says, to this guy, like, if my dad were here, what would he say? And I think that was a beautiful scene.
That was fine. I had no problem with that one. But you have to remember the framing of it. Like, first he gets to the girl. He gets to Ira.
Yes.
And she's like, you know, saying like, hey, you shouldn't have come here to save me or whatever. And because Ron is a shit, he starts yelling at her and like basically telling her off and being like, okay, fine, you're a bit fine. Stay here. I'm leaving. And then he runs away and just stumbles upon this guy. And then they remind him why he came here for. And he's like, oh yeah, I have to save the girl. It's like, bitch, you just got to the girl and decided you didn't want to save her anymore and left.
Yeah.
And that's why you're here now. That's why this conversation is occurring, is because you gave up on that. And then 2 minutes later, he's back at it.
Yeah, it's something that I think, you know, if you had a little bit more time to tell, like that would be like an episode.
It would be like, yeah, there would be like a couple
Right.
episodes where he leaves her and then he has this thing. But yeah, for it to happen in the span of 5 minutes is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, then wasn't it also like part of the plan was to do something that they had already done before and was ineffective? And I felt like they didn't really like communicate why
it's
it
gonna
would
work this
theoretically
time.
be different this time.
Yeah, some of it is like, okay, you know, now we've
Which
got
is
the
still
girl.
like, you know, the world has no water or plant life, so clearly what we should do is nuke one of the like small areas in which that exists.
It's just like Zabungle in that sense. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And then another thing about Green Legend Ron, and this is probably a little more noticeable from Gerald's experience, is the tonal dissonance of this is kind of like weird. Like there are parts where it's like, it seems like it's trying to be like a Future Boy Conan, Nazca sort of a post-apocalyptic children's-ish sort of tale. Cause they've got like these sort of exaggerated cartoony expressions or whatever, like reactions and that sort of thing. And then there's like some moment of like extreme gore, like, you know, the bit where like the guy, you know, sees the leaf growing and he like, you know, pulls at it and his whole like, you know, veins
whole,
and stuff
like,
comes
tendons
out
in
of
his
his
arm
arm.
pull out, yeah.
And it's a hallucination, but it's like the point is like still happens.
花で落ちていたか。なんだこりゃ。
The war, like the way people are killed and shot, like, you know, by these guns. And of course, you know, they're supposed to like, when they introduce Ira, obviously she's supposed to be like this Nazca sort of pacifist, but she comes off as like a bitchy psycho where it's like, you know, can't you see this person's dying? It's like, well, what about my other 3 friends who just got shot in front of you? They don't fucking count, you know? So, you know, there's that aspect to it. And I think when it aired on the Sci-Fi Channel, like, a lot of the stuff got cut out. It had to have been because, you know, there's scenes where they cut away and there's like naked women or like, you know, people being shot up and like killed in like pretty horrible ways. I guarantee you all that was removed from the Sci-Fi Channel Saturday Anime broadcast.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a funny quote because a lot of times when you see people talk about Green Legend Ron, they talk about how like this is for good story for kids or it's family friendly. And Helen McCarthy in 500 Essential Anime Movies, she said this was, quote, a well-designed, attractively animated series that should be rewarding and entertaining for children. And I'm wondering, like, did Pioneer release like a, you know, edited version of themselves?
I think
that was
they
a
might have.
practice, you know, back then. Like, you know, we talked about Dominion Tank Police, which is not Pioneer, but like that one, they had like a TV safe like redub for like the parts where it's like instead of drinking urine, it's plasma or, you know, something like that. That was a thing that got done. And I think depending on the version of this that you saw, you may have a different impression of it because some of the more like lurid things are taken out. Unfortunately, those things are the most interesting parts of the production, or it's like, you know, oh, holy shit, you know, suddenly, you know, this Beat Takeshi level murder occurs. But yeah, it's like, who is this for when you talk about like Green Legend Ron? Like, you know, obviously there's this content that just wouldn't fly. And, you know, certainly, you know, even as anime fans back then in the 90s, you know, for which you're watching a bunch of stuff, this was not like, oh, wow, this is unlike anything I've ever seen before sort of thing. It was just sort of a thing that was there. And that's why I think I didn't remember anything about this, is because Story-wise, it's kind of, a mess, not really like a fully realized potential sort of thing. Characters, lead is horrible, like we said. The girl, Ira, is, she's your cute, 90s sort of proto-moe kind of girl. The supporting cast, which, potentially interesting, didn't get a whole lot of time. Some of them I'm like, seeing it now, it's like, wow, I did not remember these people were in it at all. That I think that's why my reaction to it was this way, was like, it didn't leave an impression. So it's like, when I say it's unmemorable, it's like by definition, because I didn't remember it.
I mean, I think I've got a bit more fondness for it, but it's not a show without huge problems. And again, I can't review something that doesn't exist.
Right.
Like I said, the TV show that they maybe were thinking of making around this possibly could have been really good, but that, of course, never
When
was
did you
done.
see Green Legend Ron the first time?
I got this box set probably 1994.
But it was like a blind purchase of like, I got to buy this box set, right?
No, it was a Christmas gift.
Okay.
It was and I was really worried because I opened it and I saw this and I wanted to say to my dad, I don't have a Laserdisc player, but it wasn't the laser. It was a VHS box set. But it's just the size.
It's a huge box that contains a tiny tape in it. Yeah.
It's got 3 tapes in it, and so it's the size of a Laserdisc, and so I saw.
Oh, is it one of those like huge clamshell?
It's not
cases
it's not
that would have
clamshell.
multiple tapes?
It's cardboard. I'll show you guys pictures of it. It's a
like
beautiful.
imagine a Laserdisc box, but it just doesn't have Laserdiscs in it. It's just got tapes.
It might have been like one of the original really nice deluxe anime VHS box sets.
So was this a gift because you asked for them to get it for you? Or did they just say Jared likes anime, let me pick one?
Yes, it was the latter. Gerald likes anime. Let me find this, and so that's how I saw this in stores. I just it was just kind of prohibitively expensive because I think this thing was
Gotta be like
$90 or
$100, something like that.
Yeah, something back then. But
if it's like 3 tapes or whatever.
3 tapes and this big box and the T-shirt and the booklet and the
I had to rent anime because
always...
I didn't have even $30. Like I go to a comic book store which had a ton of anime because the store owner liked anime, which was
or
rare.
like whatever the selection at Blockbuster happened
and
to
so
be.
it's like I was paying $2 a tape to rent Bubblegum Crisis, and that's how I saw it. Because if I had to buy these things, I never would have seen anything.
Oh yeah, I never really had purchased copies of anything. It was all stuff that I rented or got, somebody copied a tape for me.
And there was no place in St. Thomas to rent anything, so I had to buy stuff either through the mail or through my trips to America. And so this was a Christmas gift, so I didn't buy this myself. But again, it is a shame because there is, and we talked about this came up again with when we talked about Macross 2, and when we talked about especially one of the ones that stands out to me is Kishin Core, where we talk about shows that are more
which was
annoying.
also a Pioneer thing, right?
That was also a Pioneer show, a bit longer, and didn't get anything else except that. These shows that exhibit this potential for being a lot better than they are, and kind of just don't bring it home.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, it's I wonder if that idea of we'll make this initial version of it is probably worse, because then you end up making something that's not that satisfying. And so then why would people want, a TV show of something that was, not
well, it worked out
satisfying.
It worked out several times for them, but we never got, the Phantom Quest Core TV series.
I think they got busted for that because of Ghost Sweeper Mikami similarities.
Yeah, but it was basically just a ripoff of that.
But I liked Phantom Quest Core, certainly.
Right. But I'm trying to think, were any of those ones that actually did get through all the way, was it the case where the original, OAVs were not good? Right. And because I'm thinking, if the OAVs end up being, not satisfying because there's not enough room for them to tell their story or whatever, then why would people want a TV series of something that, they weren't, hugely satisfied with? But
I think you could have told this in a satisfying way, but it would have to been very different because the story they were telling was it maybe should have been 6 episodes rather than 3.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also just pacing. There's so much stuff that they just crammed into that
Right.
last episode.
They spend a lot
and
of
I think if
time
they
on
had,
little minutia stuff, and then the last episode is just like no time to dwell on anything, you know.
Yeah, I think they could have streamlined a lot of that setup in the first couple episodes.
Which is
and
funny
then-
because usually my biggest complaint about anime is that it stretches things out unnecessarily. Like so many series, so
Yeah.
many anime
Right.
series.
And
I'm
again,
like,
because nowadays everything is like, you know, people want their 13 episodes or their 10 episodes or whatever. And sometimes it's like, well, I only really have a 3 episodes worth of story. Like that was
Yeah.
what disillusioned me in the 2000s, because Studio Gonzo, we got on them for the case constantly for this. They would have things that were good for maybe a 3 or 4 episode story, but they'd make a 13 or 26 episode show out of it. And
Yeah.
so they'd, you know, kind of run out.
I think the difference with Studio Gonzo was that those 3 episodes were good. It's not that they had they told their story or they didn't have enough story. That just the rest of the show was just shit.
Well, yeah,
Because
and
Studio
that's
Gonzo
the
was
reason
just a
why,
shitty studio.
You know, it's
So-
because
Yeah.
of, you know, that the similar sort of decompression sort of issue, which is
Yeah.
now the dominant issue in anime productions now, because there are very
Right.
few OAVs and almost everything they want as a TV show, because the other stuff doesn't get simulcast. And speaking of
Well,
simulcasts, this is still available to watch as simulcast. High Dive has the entire thing in both the sub and the dub. The dub is actually like one of those old 90s Ocean Group things. So, you know, all those actors
Using
are
the
in
WordFit
this.
system. Using WordFit.
Yeah, and
So-
I don't know if the version that we see, because it's, and that is an interesting question, because I guess explain to people what WordFit is, because it makes me wonder about the Japanese version that we saw, whether it was dub titled or, you know, whether the footage that we saw was synced to the dub audio or what.
Yeah, well, WordFit was just like the system that I don't know who created. Ocean Group was known for using it, where they would like record the lines and then they could tweak the audio so that it would fit into the flaps.
I actually thought they tweaked the video so that the flaps would fit. I couldn't remember if that was what the word fit was actually because
I think the audio. I think it was the audio.
It was
that
the audio
tweaked.
only. Okay. And that would be a lot of times it would introduce like these very unnatural cadences in like the way people would say something like, of course I can, like that sort of thing.
Well, also Ocean Group was notorious for like trying to match everything that the Japanese did. And
It's interesting because Ocean Group I speak very negatively of over the years, as far as like, you know, sounding like incredibly fake. Gave early Bang Zoom like a lot of shit for that too, because again, it's like Bang Zoom's like copy the Japanese intonation and stuff like that. And Ocean Group, like for whatever reason, like I just never liked, like, one, they're all Canadians and they're all sounding like weird, but then also like there's something off about like the cadence and delivery, possibly also because they're Canadians. Except years later, all these Ocean Group actors, like they end up doing other things and they're phenomenal in them. Like, dude, to this day, like, you know, a lot of these guys are still working and they're
like
great.
Dobson is still working,
Yeah,
right?
David Kay, Paul Dobson,
Yeah.
you know, Michael Dobson, et cetera. Like a lot of
Michael
these
Dobson.
guys. Jason Gray Stanford ended up, you know, becoming too big for anime dubbing because I think he ended up being on Monk or something like that. So his days of, you know, being Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century or whatever.
I mean, the one
him.
that stands out to me the most is the Fatal Fury dub. Like that was the most Canadian ass dubbing ever. I think that was Ocean Group, but
Well, yeah,
that
because
was
Jason
not
Gray
Pioneer.
Stanford was Joe Higashi in the Fatal Fury dub, yeah. So it's almost definitely, because Viz used them for Ranma and stuff
Yes.
like that. So it makes sense that they would be in Fatal Fury. You know, Richard Ian Cox, you know, Inuyasha himself, you know, they're all in this. And so that if you go on a High Dive, you can choose which one you want. And it's interesting because Sentai Filmworks did relicense Rescue this from Pioneer Genion, but they did absolutely zero to the release itself, such that if you start playing it, it will say the Pioneer LDC intro in it.
Yes,
because
this is a very. It's. I mean, you can buy this DVD for. I think I got the Sentai DVD for $3, and
Yeah, I
It's-
own it because it was like so cheap.
it was super cheap, and so the effort to I'm sure that if you had any interest in watching this, it's probably killed by the way that we talk about it. But if you have any interest in checking this out, and taking us to task on it if you don't agree, I mean, watching this, you can watch it on High Dive, or the DVD is very, very inexpensive.
And I think that DVD might be out of print because Sentai Filmworks' site doesn't sell it anymore. But
Sentai Filmworks doesn't sell it, but I think it's still around.
it's still out there. It's not like people bought this up in droves to,
No, it's a very, very
cheap.
cheap license. I mean, it was all done. They didn't have to do anything. And so there's no need to redub this, no need to retranslate it or anything. So I will admit I do love the main song to Green Legend Ran. Like, it still sticks with me. And I think that the ending to it, like the very ending was this sort of very, very somber ending. But as a whole, Green Legend Ran really doesn't hold together. It's too ambitious for the story it was trying to tell. So yeah, it's rough because I do have affection for the show.
Yeah,
but
a lot of people do. A lot of people saw it at that time, and they do have like an adolescent or childhood even nostalgia for it. And maybe
Like I said, I mean, visually, I think it's, it looks really good. So,
But yeah, I can't ignore the fact that, yes, the main character is not great. He's probably the worst part of the show. And that the story just moves at such a fast pace that it becomes too big for its britches.
yeah, it's a combination of like the story moving too fast and them spending like a lot of time on things that ultimately don't matter.
Yeah, in the economy of the time that they have to tell the story, it's very, very short. So I think I would have liked to have seen this done as like a TV series. I think, certainly those secondary characters deserved it, but of course we didn't get that. So you can't review something that doesn't exist.
sure.
So yeah, I can't fully recommend Ran. I do recommend like some of the music to it. The music is
But it's not like god awful.
No, it's not like the
No.
worst thing I've ever seen or anything. It's more
No.
just like there's a reason I didn't
Disappointing.
remember it, and it's like I remembered it being better than it was.
Yeah, I think that was my thing too, is like, because I think also part of the reason I bought it, and I guess I just didn't get around to rewatching it, was because it's like, I remembered feeling positively about it. Like, I didn't remember the details of like what happened, but I remembered liking it. And I do, like I said, I do think it's still visually worth watching. I think probably if you're just aware of maybe some of those issues, but especially if you're particularly interested in animation.
Yeah, if you watched this when, a while ago, or if you're coming to this new and you check it out, let us know what you think, because I'm very curious to hear from people both who watched this, way back in the day, or who are just newer fans who are just coming to this completely blind.
Yeah, let me know if you watch the supplementals and you say, hey, wait a second, there could have been like Space Marine heavy bolter guys with like the giant gun and the thing belt feeding into their backpack, and they didn't put that in this cartoon.
That's what makes me believe that there was so much more.
There was so
that
much
they
more
were like,
planned, right?
That they were
Yeah.
going to have because originally they were going to have they were going to travel on like these bipedal dolphins, which looked neat.
Right. And the only time we see it is that they do like a weird like ritual sacrifice of a little weird dolphin creature. At the start of the
Yes.
third episode, and it's like, what the hell does this have to do with anything? And just suddenly,
Right.
there's a
Also, what is that? Like,
right, no explanation. Suddenly, it's like
Yeah.
a lot of times, like, and maybe it's part of the world building. Like again, when the Rotoists are like saying, like, make way for the, whatever, and it's like this just gigantic
The bishops, yeah, the
Modoc
mutants.
head, that is like, the bishop. Okay, Devious, don't move. The
Yeah.
text, Vic, don't say the text. And it's like, these like weird mutant things, which turns out they are not aliens at all. It turns out at the end, they're like, oh no, we were mutated by being around the presence of, the green.
Right.
And it's like, oh, so who the hell were
so
these
it's also
things?
like, is there just the one alien? Like,
Unclear.
It is,
Yeah.
it's a lot of these things, and it's a shame because the way that it's kind of telling the story by just presenting the world is what I wish anime would do more, rather than
Yes.
sit people down and talk about like we have three factions and this is how they interact and this is why we're fighting and this is exactly why we're doing this. And it's like, well, how about you use this visual medium to tell me this visually?
Right. Like, I think the
That's,
best instance of that was like the first episode. And I thought, like, as I watched that, I bet people would have scoffed at this back then, but now it's like completely realistic. So there's a part
Yes.
where one of the revolutionaries in Hazard is on the run from the Rotoist army. And so he's wounded, and they've got him pinned down in like a sort of oil derrick sort of area. And so he takes his gun, because there ends up being a geyser of oil, and shoots the rounds, and it causes a spark, and it's like results in this huge explosion. And the explosion kills like an innocent bystander who's just sitting there, standing on the side of the road, doing nothing, minding his own business. And then he's just like instantaneously vaporized in flames. And then the reaction to everyone else around is momentarily startled, and then they go back to doing what they're doing, don't even care, because it's like commonplace. And it's like, oh, well, that must have been ridiculous to us then. But it's like, no, it's exactly what happens now.
あの世で会おうぜ。
またかね。綺麗だね、母ちゃん。
Is the very much the Judge Dredd, like, the mall will reopen in 30 minutes as we clean off the blood from the floor from the latest, mass shooting.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think some of that problem is due to the popularity of like isekai, because it's like, if all of your characters have lived in this world, they're sort of integrated into it. Whereas if you do have this person that's like from completely outside of it, like they do need to have things explained to them. But it's not that it only occurs in isekai, so I think it just became like a bad habit.
Yeah, a very bad habit. It's a shame, because there's many interesting like layers to this world that could be explored, but will never be explored, because the writer is dead, the project is long since gone, no one really, has had any interest in it. The story, what we got was not good enough.
Yeah, on the subject of the writer Yu Yamamoto, the main thing he's known for writing is the J9 trilogy. Sasuriger, Braiger, Boxinger. And years ago, they were talking about like there was going to be a fourth installment of J9, and Meek was going to do the song, and we'd never heard anything. And probably because he died a couple of years ago and was probably not in the best of health leading up to that. So I guess that's most likely not happening. He also wrote like a lot of the original Mobile Suit Gundam. Like he was around for a lot of like really definitive, anime sci-fi type things, such that this is not necessarily going to be the thing that he's remembered for doing compared to like all that stuff he did at Tatsunoko and all the stuff he did for Sunrise, etc. Time Bokon, etc. So,
Yeah. So that is Green Legend Ran. If anybody has any final thoughts?
I mean, I think we kind of covered it all. I would be interested to hear from people who like had some memories of it, or if they own this. And again, if you do have a High Dive subscription, and at this point I would recommend, with the amount of stuff that's on there, that it's actually, pretty worth it. And it's very inexpensive for a High Dive subscription as well. And it's unfortunate, like, that this didn't end up being better than it was. It's more just like an also ran, like when people think about like, how Get It also ran, of like pioneer releases of the day.
This was one of their earliest, like not their first, but one of their
right. And I can only
ones,
assume that like the license remains like available, just because again, cost nothing. They're giving it away.
It's probably in a box in a
bundle
of a whole
set
bunch of
with
other,
like 20 other things, and you get this.
And it's got a dub, it's got a translation, it's got the video files. You just throw that on a disc and put some artwork
even
there.
though the translation at times make you wonder if it's like, is this 90% subtitled? I'm pretty sure Grant, he didn't say fuck or whatever in the. I mean, whatever. I'll take it. It's thematically appropriate, for him to drop that F-bomb. Even though he's a kid. Also, the Japanese, this guy is the least convincing small child ever. This dude's like 45 years old. And he's not like, they didn't get like a young girl or something like they usually do. No, they got like a middle-aged man to be the voice of Ron in the Japanese audio.
I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, it's a shame. I remembered it as better than it was. And it's an interesting experiment that I guess didn't really go anywhere. And so we want to hear from you. What did you think about it? email us at animeworldorder@gmail.com. Leave a comment on the blog at animeworldorder.com. I guess check out our Patreon if you want us to force us to watch Handshakers.
We're also on Twitter.
On Twitter, yeah. We're very, out there and available.
Where we're not yet is, on YouTube, like with posting like these review segments, just because I don't have, like, I could maybe just a still image at this point.
Maybe we will make this the first.
Okay.
Maybe I will work on this. Don't hold me to that. But
I mean, I haven't held you to it for like years now, so it's not like we're ever gonna like necessarily hold it to it, but it could happen, is what we're saying.
We will do our best and maybe get this out there on YouTube. And because I guess that's where people actually consume their media is YouTube. So anyway, thank you all for checking this out. Let us know what you think of Green Legend Ran, and we will be back again very soon.